Well, as this quorum call continues on the floor of the Senate, in just a couple of minutes, senators will continue working on a small business bill that would extend funding for small high-tech and research firms to get started. Amendments are expected, but there's been no deal yet on votes for those. Lawmakers are hoping for final passage before the end of the week. Right now, the House is voting on a rule for debating a school vouchers bill for the District of Columbia. It's brought by House Speaker John Boehner. The bill authorizes about $20 million annually from 2012 to 2016 to provide school vouchers for low-income students. We are also expecting votes on a bill reducing government regulation of pesticides. You can see live coverage of the House on C-SPAN. And as Congress works behind the scenes to come up with a budget agreement before next Friday, this from the Hill from Michael O'Brien earlier today. A top Democrat said yesterday that some of the most controversial riders attached to a House spending bill would be a deal breaker here in the Senate. Senator Charles Schumer of New York said riders to defund Planned Parenthood and the Environmental Protection Agency would not fly in the upper chamber. Democrats' refusal to accept the Planned Parenthood and EPA riders would go a long way toward Schumer's goal of driving a wedge between Republican leaders in the House and the more insurgent class of Tea Party freshmen. Again, that from the Hill newspaper.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to let me ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent for the period of morning business to be extended until 3 p.m. with the time equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak up to 10 minutes each.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really appreciate everyone's cooperation in trying to help us move the SBIR bill through the Senate this week. It's a very important bill, and hopefully we can get back on that officially this afternoon as the leader pending or those amendments filed against the bill. But I see at this time the senator from Maryland who was on the floor wanted to say just a minute about the bill, and then Senator Boxer came down to speak about an amendment. Senator Vitter is also here, and I know that he'd like to be recognized in just a few minutes as well. And then we'll just alternate back and forth through morning business, and there's no consent agreement at this point, but we'll try to be fair to the members to move back and forth through the afternoon until 3 o'clock.
Mr. President, could I ask the senator to yield for a question?
You would go after Senator Cardin.
Okay, I just want to clarify that, and then I'll...
And then yes. Senator Vitter.
Because I have a pressing event after, so that's just what I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Maryland is recognized.
I'm only going to take about 2 minutes. I just really want to get back a little bit on the SBIR bill itself and compliment Senator Landrieu, the chairman of the Small Business Committee, and Senator Snowe, the ranking Republican member. This bill is a very important bill, and I think it's important that we get back to it. and that we deal with amendments that are relevant to this legislation and move it forward. We've been on this bill now for a period of time. It's time to move on, and I've just urged my colleagues, let's take up the amendments that are relevant to this legislation. Let's move it forward. This is bipartisan legislation, passed our committee by an overwhelming vote of Democrats and Republicans. It's a bill that will help create jobs in our community. We are talking about how America, as the President said, can out-educate, out-innovate, and outbuild our competitors. We've got to out-innovate. The SBIR bill makes it easier for small companies to be able to innovate for America, to help this nation grow, to help our economy grow. It's about jobs and innovation. The SBIR program provides funds for small tech firms to be able to innovate and grow and create jobs, and for America to continue to lead the world in innovation. That's what this bill is about. It provides predictability, so that if you're going to go into a business, you know that the program is going to be here to give the permanency of reauthorization. It provides a greater share of the pie for our smaller companies. Why? Because that's where we're going to get the job growth in America, and that's where innovation is going to come from. This is common sense legislation that we need to move forward. I know everybody has their particular amendment that they want to get on that's really not related at all to this bill. Let's do our small businesses a favor. Let's do the American economy a favor. Let's do something that can really help not only create jobs, but move America forward in innovation. And let's get this bill moving for the sake of our economy. And with that, I would yield the floor.
California is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleagues. I need to tell the American people and my colleagues who haven't been following this important debate on a really good bill. I am so grateful to the senator from Louisiana for this bill, Senator Landrieu. But unfortunately, there has been an amendment on the very first day that was attached to this bill, which would stop the Environmental Protection Agency forever from enforcing the Clean Air Act as it relates to carbon pollution. Now, this is a first of a kind. It's never been done. It's essentially a repeal of the Clean Air Act as it involves one particular pollutant, carbon, which has been found to be endangerment to our people, an endangerment to our people. The EPA didn't just wake up one day and say, we think carbon is dangerous. No. The scientists in both the Bush administration and the Obama administration found out that carbon is a dangerous pollutant, dangerous to the health of our family. So EPA, in what is, I think, a very solid way, has started to prepare to regulate carbon. Now, they have done it in a way that has said they're not going after farms, they're not going after small business, they are going after the biggest polluters in the country. Well, guess what? The friends of those polluters right here in this Senate chamber have decided, and they already did it in the House, the new Republican majority, that they're going to stop EPA in its tracks. That is why I will ask unanimous consent to place in the record a very good letter from the American Lung Association, the American Public Health Association, the Trust for America's Health, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. I'd ask to put that in the record.
Without objection, it will be included in the record.
And they say, we strongly oppose Congress's blocking EPA's effort to implement the Clean Air Act. That's one of the things they say in this letter. Then I ask unanimous consent to place in the record a letter from, by the way, these are newly dated letters, 2 days ago. Yesterday, one of them. Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policies. I'd ask unanimous consent to put that letter in the record.
Without objection, it will be included in the record.
It says business supports EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a letter from Ann Kelly, who's the director of this organization. She's writing as major U.S. businesses to urge you to oppose all the amendments that would block, delay, or curtail EPA's ability to take action on the regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. It is not business friendly. It is friendly, these terrible amendments, to the biggest polluters in America, who today just took a full-page ad. I guess they can afford 20 grand. Maybe it's 50 grand. I don't know what it cost them. A whole page here saying, stop EPA's job-killing greenhouse gas regulation. Of course, who are they? The Industrial Minerals Association, the Mining Association, the petroleum marketers, chemical manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the question for us as a body is, who do we stand with? The biggest polluters in America or the American people? 69% of whom said, and if I could see that chart, 69% of whom said in a bipartisan poll, Mr. President, EPA should update Clean Air Act standards with stricter air pollution limits. This group here in this body, for whatever their reasons, and I respect their reasons, just strongly disagree with them, are saying stop EPA, stop. 68% believe Congress should not stop EPA from enforcing Clean Air Act standards, and that's what these amendments do. Now, I say to you, show me one other thing besides we all love our mothers that would get 68% of the vote of the American people in a bipartisan vote. 69% believe EPA scientists, not Congress, should set pollution standards. But we have senators here playing scientists, putting on their white coats, deciding what EPA should do when it ought to be based on science. And what is the science telling us? That it's dangerous to breathe in air pollution with lots of carbon in it. Now, I would ask that I could put another letter in the record. Center for One Sky, Center for Biological Diversity, Clean Air Task Force, Clean Water Action, Conservation Law Foundation, Defenders of Wildlife. I can't even take the time to read all. Interfaith Power and Light, League of Women Voters, NRDC, Safe Climate Campaign, Sierra Club, Union of Concerned Scientists, Republicans for Environmental Protection, I love that one, Voices for Progress, World Wildlife Fund. Same letter. I'd ask that that be put in the record, dated March 30th of this year. Thanks.
Without objection, will be included in the record.
Thank you. It says, for 40 years the EPA has protected our health, and for 40 years the Clean Air Act has been reducing dozens of different pollutants while contributing to America's economic prosperity. Every single time we try to rein in pollution, special interests say, no, 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 1,000 times no, we'll stop growth, we'll stop jobs, we'll kill the economy, it's awful, awful, awful. Well, let me give you one economic fact. If you can't breathe, you can't work. And here's a little girl, suffering, struggling. I urge my colleagues who support McConnell to look at this. They're not here, but maybe on TV they will. Look at this picture. She's gasping for air. Is that what we want for her future? We have another picture of a little boy. This is what's happening in this country because of the polluters who won't clean up their mess. Here's another beautiful child. We all love children. How many speeches have we had on this floor? We love children. Children are our future. We'll fight for our children. You want their future to look like this, breathing through a device? Come on. This is clear. You go to any school, I defy my colleagues, try this. Go to any school in your state and say, by the way, how many of you have asthma? And you'll see the little hands go up. And then you say, how many of you know someone with asthma? You'll see half the class raise their hands. And yet, what are we doing here on this beautiful bill that Senator Landrieu, I know, wants to have a clean bill. She doesn't want these amendments on it, regardless of how she may feel or I may feel. We both agree we shouldn't have these amendments, but so be it. Well, we got to vote these amendments down because we are responsible for these kids. And all our side is saying is very simple. The Clean Air Act has worked. If I went up to you and I said, if you know something's working perfectly well, would you mess with it? Would you change it? No. Why would you, if it's working well? So let's take a look at how well is the Clean Air Act working. And, Mr. President, I know how strongly you feel on this subject. So let's take a look at this. In 2010, the Clean Air Act prevented 160,000 of premature deaths. 160,000 premature deaths. By 2020, that number is projected to rise to 230,000 cases. So if we stay on course and we don't fool around with the Clean Air Act, as my Republican friends have already done in the House, and I pray God they don't succeed here, we're going to see 230,000 more deaths in 2020. In 2010, the Clean Air Act prevented 1.7 million fewer asthma attacks. I showed you the picture of those children. Why do we want to mess with that? The Clean Air Act prevented 130,000 acute heart attacks. You read the stories. So-and-so went out, heavy bad air day, took a little jog and collapsed. I got to tell you, we have a success story to tell about what the Clean Air Act is doing. And I'll show you a chart of what happened in Los Angeles. A lot of you go to my beautiful state. I know Chairman of the committee said she just was there, and it was a terrific visit to our state. We have a magnificent state. But there were times when you went to Los Angeles, you saw the air. That is not a good thing. When you see the air, that is a bad thing. And the air was thick. And people were told in many, many mornings, do not go out unless you must. The air is so dangerous. The Clean Air Act passed. The Clean Air Act passed. And guess what? In 2010, we had no mornings like that. None. We went from 166 days a year of health advisories in Southern California to none in 2010. And I've got to say, you show me any other law that has had this record of success, I'll smile and be happy. We went from 166 days a year of smog advisories to none because of the Clean Air Act. I've already told you, we've saved lives, asthma attacks. We have done it all. And yet there are people in this chamber who want to either postpone enforcing the Clean Air Act as it relates to carbon, or want to stop it forever, which is the McConnell and the worst amendment of them all, if I had to rate them. I think I have a couple of other charts to share with you, and then I'll close. The McConnell amendment, which is, I'd say, the worst of all the amendments, none of them are good. None of them are good. They all interfere with the Environmental Protection Agency, which has supported the EPA by 69% of the people. But the McConnell amendment is a disaster. It's the same as the Upton amendment, the Upton bill in the House and the Inhofe bill in the Senate. In the McConnell amendment, what does it do? It says forevermore the EPA cannot do anything to regulate carbon pollution, regardless of how dangerous it is, regardless of what the scientists tell us, regardless of what the physicians tell us, regardless of what the people tell us through the polls, regardless of what our communities tell us, what our states tell us, what our mayors tell us. Forevermore, they are repealing the Clean Air Act as it relates to carbon pollution. Radical, extreme, outrageous. We have to beat it. We must beat it. It is so bad. It goes against the Supreme Court decision, and by the way, there'll be lawsuits up the wazoo if it ever became law, but it won't, I pray. The Supreme Court said if we find, scientists, that carbon pollution is dangerous, we have to regulate it. And guess what? The scientists found carbon pollution is dangerous. They made an endangerment finding. The EPA is ready to act, I think, in a judicious way, and they're very mindful. They're not going after farms. They're not going after small business. That's not good enough for these special interests who took this huge ad today standing against the beautiful ad. It looks almost environmental. Green. This isn't green. It's dirty. Dirty air. That's what this ad stands for, dirty air. A lot of people didn't want me to come back here because they knew I'd come here and tell the truth about this. But I'm here, and I'm going to tell the truth every day, every way, because I love my grandkids, and I love everybody's grandkids. And as far as I'm concerned, that's why I'm here. Not to protect the rich polluters who make billions of dollars a year. They can clean up their act. We proved it. We proved it. We said we don't want kids struggling for air. And we said we can do this right. We proved it. We not only proved that we can clean up the air. We not only proved we could save lives. We not only proved you can save asthma attacks. We proved you can grow this economy. And I'm going to close now and let my friend from Louisiana have the floor. But I have to close with this. There's a lot of talk about how this is bad for business. Mary, could you find that section that talks about the technology growth? But the fact is, every time the polluters got up and said, don't pass any more Clean Air Act amendments, it's going to be bad for jobs, we found out that cleaning up the environment actually creates jobs. Not only does it create jobs, it creates new technologies. Not only does it create new technologies, but those technologies are exported to the world. And I will place in the record the number of jobs that have been created as we move to clean up the air. So the reason I'm here, and this, I think this is quite a spirited discussion that I'm having with all of you, is because we are facing 4 bad amendments. 4. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Worst being McConnell. All of which will either slow down the EPA or stop the EPA. And by the way, the McConnell amendment is so terrible that it even says EPA can no longer have anything to do with tailpipe emissions of cars, which is such an important part of our dirty air that we are facing. So in closing, I want to say, according to information from the Institute of Clean Air Companies, those are American companies who oppose these big polluting companies, from 1999 to 2001, the number of Boilermakers in the U.S. states increased by 6,700, a 35% increase, even though we said you have to clean up the air. The Department of Commerce shows the U.S. environmental technology industry generated $300 billion in revenues, supported 1.7 million jobs. The air pollution control sector produced $18 billion in revenue. Small and medium-sized companies make up 99% of the private sector firms in this sector of the economy. So here's what you've got. You've got these huge, multi-billion-dollar polluters who can afford to take one-page ads, full-page ads in the Washington Post. They want to continue polluting the air, and they don't want to clean it up. And you have a whole other group of businesses who've written to us and said, please, let the EPA do its work. It saves lives, it saves our children, and it creates many jobs, new jobs, clean jobs, good jobs. If we go down the path of the McConnell Amendment and these other amendments, we are ceding our leadership in environmental clean tech to China. That is the last thing we want to do. They are already surpassing us in solar production, and we created it. So, ladies and gentlemen, the bill before us is a fine bill. I hope if we have to vote for these amendments, and they do come up as part of this agreement as we move forward, we will not pass any of them, and we will allow the people to have their way. 69% of them say, let the EPA do their job. Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to Senator Landrieu, and I yield the floor and turn it over to Senator Vitter.
Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, since President Obama took office, the price of a gallon of gasoline at the pump has risen 96%. 96% from $1.83 to now $3.60 with absolutely no end in sight. Meanwhile, and not coincidentally, the President has virtually shut down the Gulf of Mexico. He's canceled numerous energy lease sales. He's refused to act on stalled onshore permits. He's dramatically increased environmental regulation, and he's begun regulating CO2 by administrative fiat. All of that has helped get us to where we are. Now, Mr. President, President Obama went today to Georgetown University, and at least he's begun focusing on and addressing the energy situation. I guess I give him points for that. He went to Georgetown today and delivered a speech which he called a blueprint for a secure energy future. But like a lot of presidential speeches, Mr. President, this is great sounding, rah-rah, nice title, but pretty disappointing from my point of view on substance. First of all, let's talk about the whole premise of the speech, a blueprint for a secure energy future. I was hopeful on hearing about the plan for this speech that we would be seeing an unveiling of a real energy policy, including moving in the right direction in terms of domestic production, utilizing our domestic energy resources. But unfortunately, Mr. President, this is more of the same. In fact, the President admits freely this is absolutely more of the same. He says, quote, "Today my administration is releasing a blueprint for a secure energy future that outlines the comprehensive national energy policy we've pushed since the day I took office," close quote. So this is simply a restatement of the last 2 years of policy. In my opinion, clearly failed, clearly counterproductive policy that has helped get us to $3.60 at the pump and climbing. When you look even more at the substance of the speech, Mr. President, it's more disappointing. The whole speech is about 51 paragraphs. Of those 51 paragraphs, I look to see how many are about tapping our domestic traditional energy resources. Well, 6 paragraphs of 51, just a little over 10%. 4 paragraphs were about domestic oil production, and 2 were about domestic natural gas production, and even those 2 were mostly about possibly increasing regulation on production of natural gas from shale, making it more difficult, not accessing more of our domestic energy resources. And then what's the picture on domestic oil production, those 4 paragraphs? Well, the President says, quote, "To keep reducing that reliance on imports, my administration is encouraging offshore oil exploration and production," close quote. Really? That's a news headline to my constituents in the Gulf Coast, because every day we live a far different reality. We live the reality of an administration has moved in the opposite direction, making domestic oil and gas production far more difficult, not easier. Since the tragedy of the BP disaster, we've only had 7 deepwater exploratory permits issued. 7 issued compared to a comparable period before the disaster, 68, so about 10%. That is encouraging offshore oil and gas exploration and production? I don't think so. Since that disaster, the working rotary rigs in the Gulf has fallen dramatically from about 55 to 25. It's been cut in more than half. That is encouraging offshore oil exploration and production? I don't think so. We need to change the policy that is virtually shutting down the Gulf and stopping domestic energy production. 7 deepwater exploratory permits is not adequate. 7, as I said, is roughly 10% of the rate that existed before. Of course, we need to make changes, and we have. Of course, we need to learn the lessons of the Deepwater Horizon explosion, and we have. but 7, again, is roughly 10% of the previous rate. We need to do far better. And if we're going to really encourage that domestic production, what about things like production in Alaska's Beaufort Sea? EPA is sitting on those permits, not issuing those permits. As a result, Shell Oil announced that it's abandoning efforts to produce anything there. Is that what the President's talking about, encouraging oil exploration production? What about the lease sales he canceled? President Obama canceled the Western Gulf lease sale that was scheduled. He canceled that in May of 2010. Mr. President, if you're serious, are you going to reverse that decision? Also in May of 2010, the President canceled the planned Virginia lease sale. Now, unfortunately, in this speech, he didn't reverse that policy. He's continuing that cancellation. What about the cancellation of offshore tracks in Alaska's Cook Inlet? The President canceled that in March of this year, this month. And unfortunately, in this speech, he did not reverse that policy. Withdrawn leases. The President's Department of Interior has withdrawn 77 lease sales in Utah that were planned, withdrew those in 2009. No reversal on that policy. Is that encouraging oil exploration and production? So time and again, the President has actually worked in the opposite direction, shutting down domestic production, making it more difficult, not, as he said in his speech today, quote, encouraging oil exploration and production, close quote. We need a new energy policy, not a restated policy, not same old from the last 2 years. And we need a policy that does many things, including harnesses and accesses our enormous abundance of energy resources in this country. You know, Americans are not used to thinking of ourselves as energy rich, but we are. And nonpartisan, non-biased sources like Congressional Research Service says that we are the most energy-rich country in the world, bar none. The only country coming close to us is Russia in terms of our vast array and amount of domestic energy resources. Now, we're out of the habit of thinking of ourselves that way for a simple reason. The United States Congress, and this President in particular, has taken 95% of those abundant resources and put them off limits under federal law. No other energy-rich country does anything like that. We continue to do it, even with the price at the pump rising so dramatically. We need to stop that. We need to access our own richness, our own resources to take care of ourselves. And that's a big part of the energy plan we need, which unfortunately was not part of the President's blueprint for a secure energy future unveiled today, restated today at Georgetown. Many colleagues will join me tomorrow in introducing a bill that lays out that new energy vision to unlock the enormous potential we have here at home. And the bill is called 3D, the Domestic Jobs, Domestic Energy and Deficit Reduction Act of 2011. I'm honored to be joined by between 20 and 30 colleagues. The list is still growing. We'll formally introduce that act tomorrow. And this is an act, a bill aimed at our domestic energy resources, unshackling that potential, letting us get access to that enormous potential for domestic energy, and with it, great U.S. jobs right here in this country, and deficit reduction. So many of the primary challenges we face find their nexus in energy. Again, energy independence, self-reliance, which we need now more than ever, particularly with unrest in the Middle East. Secondly, jobs. We say we're trying to do everything we can to come out of this very tough recession, but we're not, because the U.S. energy sector has the potential for enormous job growth. And again, we've taken such a large percentage of those resources, 95%, and put them off limits. And deficit reduction. Along with producing more domestic energy would come tremendous revenue to the federal government. After the personal income tax, this is the top source of federal revenue, royalties on domestic energy production, second only to the personal income tax. So again, why don't we solve all of these problems? Energy independence, U.S. jobs, deficit reduction by fully developing, aggressively developing our U.S., our domestic energy sector. Specifically, our 3D bill would do 6 primary things. First, it mandates Outer Continental Shelf lease sales, directing the Interior Department to conduct a lease sale in each Outer Continental Shelf planning area for which there is a commercial interest. Would also consider the 2010 to 2015 planning area complete. Secondly, it would open up ANWR, the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, to energy production. This is a vast source of potential energy production, job creation, deficit reduction, again, that we have put off limits through congressional and presidential action. Third, it would require action on stalled onshore permits, things like the leases that Interior withdrew in 2009 in Utah, things like the EPA inaction, actually withdrawing a CWA permit for Spruce No. 1 mine in West Virginia. State Department sitting on the permit issue in terms of the Keystone XL pipeline project. The EPA not issuing permits for shale oil operations in offshore Alaska. So it would direct action in all of those areas. Fourth, it would properly limit time frames for environmental and judicial review. It would not change any of those review standards. It would just change the law so that those reviews couldn't go on ad infinitum. It would streamline the process and properly and reasonably limit those time frames. Fifth, it would block regulation of CO2 by administrative fiat. We're going to have a vote coming up soon on the Senate floor on that issue. I'm very hopeful that it will be a majority vote in favor of this opinion to block that regulation by administrative fiat that I espouse. This is also included in the 3D bill. And six, we would actually create an alternative energy trust fund from 25% of the new revenue produced from ANWR. So we'd capture 25% of that brand new revenue for alternative energy development, research, and production, and that would be positive as well. This is the sort of domestic energy focus I think we need. This is the sort of movement toward real energy security as well as job creation, as well as deficit reduction that I would have hoped the President would have at least hinted at Georgetown today, but he did not. His speech was same old, explicitly restating what he's been doing for the last 2 years. Mr. President, I urge all of my colleagues to join in this effort, to join in similar efforts. Americans face tough times, and it's not being made any tougher by the price at the pump going up and up and up. Again, since President Obama took office, that price has risen 96%. From $1.83 per gallon to $3.60 per gallon, and there's no end in sight. We need to access our own resources. We need to put Americans to work. We need to reduce our deficit with that extra new revenue, and we can do it all by accessing U.S. domestic energy resources more fully, not putting 95% of those resources off limits, off the table by either presidential fiat or congressional action. I urge all of my colleagues to join us in this effort, to join similar efforts to give Americans real relief at the pump, to increase our energy independence, to lower the deficit, to produce good American jobs. Thank you, Mr. President, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll of the Senate.
Mr. Akaka.
The pending business in the Senate, a small business and technology bill that continues 2 programs for small high-tech and research firms for 8 years with some changes. We're waiting for a senator to come to the floor to speak. A couple of stories from the Associated Press. At a speech this morning at Georgetown University, President Obama outlined a goal of reducing U.S. oil imports by 1/3 by 2025. That's done by increasing domestic oil production and relying more on biofuels, natural gas, and nuclear power. The President also wants more energy efficient vehicles. We'll have the President's speech in our overnight programming, and it's also available right now at cspan.org. Also from the Associated Press, House and Senate aides say that negotiations have resumed in an attempt to prevent a government shutdown next Friday when temporary spending runs out. The talks center on cutting $33 billion from current spending levels. That figure is below the $60 billion plus in cuts passed by the House last month, but also represents significant movement by Democrats originally backing a freeze at current rates.